Welcome to a presentation on Chiron. Chiron is so significant in our chart that it requires a whole presentation on its own. And I have done that multiple times doing webinars just on Chiron, as with other features like esoteric Venus, esoteric Mars, and a few other features like that that really are so significant when we start to look at esoteric psychology, the spiritual path, and how astrology interacts with our spiritual path. So as we proceed with Chiron, you want to have your birth chart handy and a notepad handy. There will be several times that you will be encouraged to pause the video and to really think on certain things. And then, of course, to whatever extent you want to continue to reflect on Chiron, it is very worthwhile. These are the glyphs, that is to say, this is the glyph, and this is something that is also symbolic in that Chiron is key. It turns the key to understanding certain long-standing psychological themes that we have within us, that we live on a probably pretty consistent basis through our life. Some of those important psychological themes could have come from our childhood. Others might have had certain cycles in our life. So when we look at Chiron, and of course it is down here, this is my chart. We will be using a couple of people's charts in this presentation. None of them are for people in the class. But this is my Chiron. My Chiron's in the second house. So what we want to understand is that the Chiron is not only multi-layered in its meaning, and therefore in the energetic that it represents within our chart, and therefore within our life, but it also encapsulates primary themes that are in one's chart. So we've touched a little bit on this primary theme idea. We will get into it very much in the esoteric course. But if you've done any work on this so far or pondered this at all so far, then again, have those forefront in your mind as well. The best way that I have found to study Chiron and to explore Chiron in one's chart is through the classical Greek myth of Chiron. And so that's what we're going to use tonight and work through it. You will find that various components of the myth apply to you personally. Maybe not all of them, but probably most of them. They might apply at different stages of your life, or again, certain of the themes of Chiron be carried through your entire life. And so as we engage this, again, you'll have your chart and, a notepad handy. Let Chiron speak to you. Use synonyms for the words that will be highlighted. Again, in your pondering, when you pause the video and you're reflecting, think of words that are related to the words that I've chosen, just because, different words may have fuller emphasis to other people. And here we go. These are Chiron's basic themes. I won't read them because we're going to take them up one at a time. And before we get to the myth, it is of value to know when it was discovered. The Master DK says that when humanity is ready, that is when planets or astrological factors are discovered. So if we take that as a rule of thumb, then when we look at, for instance, Uranus being discovered in the late 1700s, Neptune's discovery in the middle 1800s, and then Pluto's discovery in 1930. At each of those junctures, what was reflective of the planet was absolutely happening within humanity. Revolution was happening on both sides of the Atlantic in the middle 1700s until the end of the 1700s. In the middle 1800s, we were, as a humanity, looking at the delusion of slavery, of ether was discovered and started to be used in surgery. And so drugs, the opium trade, addiction to caffeine through the British Tea Company, as well as coffee from Africa, was now extant throughout most of the known world due to colonization. So addiction, very hard addiction, like opium addiction, and how ether then started to was the seed of basically the pharmaceutical industry, it and cocaine, which of course came from South America because South America had been colonized. So that type of thing was happening in the middle 1800s through the end of the 1800s, and of course continues to this day. And Pluto was in the 1930s, 1930, 1933. And of course, then you have the rise of fascism. You have its discovery between the two world wars, as well as right after an influenza epidemic. And so again, massive, massive death happening in the world. Some of it perpetrated by humankind itself, and then other, such as influenza, that we had we were powerless against. So Chiron had this shape-shifting kind of beginning, in that it was called a minor planet at first, then an asteroid, and some actually wondered if it was a comet. So that shape-shifting factor is going to play out in our reflections. The discovery of Chiron birthed or inaugurated a new category of astronomical features in the heavens. They're called the centaurs, and largely that's because of where they are. They're between the invisible outer planets of Jupiter and Saturn. That's where they start to be visible, and then they extend out to the unseen planets of Uranus and Neptune. We have not discovered any, to my knowledge, outside of Neptune. Those asteroid type of items that have been found closer to Pluto are not called centaurs. So, the myth. The myth has a number of versions, but the essence of them is basically the same. Notice that Chiron is a centaur. He is a half horse, half human being animal. So his mother was a nymph, a wood nymph, who, according to one of the primary versions of the myth, was being chased by the Titan Kronos. Of course, Kronos is an immortal. He's a god. He's a Titan. And in trying to get away from Kronos, by this version of the myth, she transformed herself into a horse. He did the same, transformed himself into a stallion, caught her, basically, raped her. She did not want to mate with him. And Chiron is the result of that mating. So the first wounded theme, because of course Chiron, is the wounded healer. So the first wound or wounded theme is deceit, could be force against one, or some sort of betrayal. In the case of Philyra, notice the word Philly. Our word Philly comes from Philyra. In the case of Philyra, her attempt, what betrayed her was her disguise. It did not work. And of course, there was no one around that could help her. This is a titan, some huge, vast, godlike being. So when you look at your chart, when you stop and pause this, which will be now for the first time, then you want to look at the sign and the placement of Chiron, and just think about this theme. And if it applies, if it blatantly does, as in, childhood situations, or let's say, infidelity in a marriage or in relationships or in friendships, these kinds of things. So we'll have you pause. Then, after Chiron is born, Philyra takes one look at him and says, I don't think so. You don't belong to me. I'm not going to raise you. Of course, the father is gone. There's no relationship with Kronos whatsoever. So Philyra, according to the myth, kind of just drops him off the side of Olympus by one myth, and by another, just leaves him in the woods. So this is the second primary wound, that of being unwanted or abandoned. So again, ponder, stop, pause, and ponder that for yourself. And as you do, consider again the sign that Chiron is in. To expand on that, undoubtedly you've paused and come back. So to expand on that, we want to expand words. So abandoned, unwelcome, unwanted, unloved, unappreciated, or disrespected. So again, the image here on the screen is that of migrant workers. That applies. So it's not just, again, the blatancy of, for instance, a really troubled childhood. It could be other forms in which the Chiron has worked this wound of our psyche, which of course is our karma working out from a strictly spiritual cause, conditions, results point of view. But that's not to at all be cavalier about the pain and the suffering and the hardship that any human being, and most human beings, of course, experience through these types of wounds that we are talking about. So again, pause for a moment, please, and reflect on these things. Now, here he is. He's, a youth, a baby, basically, and doesn't fit in. Mother doesn't want him, never knew his father. He's got this peculiar shape, and it is said that Chiron was distinct among centaurs in that he was a full a full human being with a horse rump, basically. So that's not often how Chiron is depicted, even in something like the Percy Jackson movies. He's depicted as 4 legs of a horse. But if you look at, let's see if we have a picture here. Yeah, here. And I think we have one other where the whole legs of a human being are represented. And this stands out in multiple myths of Chiron, thus again designating that he was of a higher order of centaur. And therefore, again, as we're going to talk about, he was a misfit even among his own. But first and foremost, of course, he realizes just because he's been abandoned, that for many human beings is what creates the feeling for them of not belonging. It is the very fact that they were abandoned, were neglected, were, had such a difficult situation in early life, just like Chiron did, that has them feel different than others. And of course they are. The formative experiences that you might have had, or that some people have had, those formative experiences were absolutely different than, the happy childhood that many other people have had. So what is important, though, before we take up this theme specifically of feeling like a misfit, or feeling different, feeling like, you haven't found your peers yet, you haven't found your buds, is that unto itself the realization is one of uniqueness. So that realization, that recognition within oneself, is unto itself not negative. The storyline that goes with it might have hardship, but for instance, someone who, let's say, is born with, let's say that they're born just naturally smart, somebody who's born intuitive, somebody that's born sensitive, somebody that's born with, blonde hair and a dark-haired family. I mean, whatever it might be, that unto itself is not a particular hardship or derived from a hardship, but it is a uniqueness. And so, again, unto itself, the recognition of being distinct, or a distinction within oneself, is unto itself not a hardship or a negative. However, so often, and the majority of times, especially for children, it leads to a feeling of loneliness. You can't talk to other people about this or that. So we have this relationship of uniqueness, distinction, be it from experiences or that we incarnated with. Again, the examples of sensitivity, intuition, being smart, being naturally musical, naturally theatrical, I mean, whatever it might be, that are distinct qualities within one. And so that uniqueness and its relationship to the self. This, too, is an aspect of the Chiron myth. And that has to do with, of course, it's between Saturn and Uranus. So it's going to have qualities of both. The uniqueness is Uranus, and the self, and how the self has to fit in, and the self has to kind of go along with the crowd, or find a crowd to go along with. Well, that's basically Saturn. So get ready to pause again and reflect for yourself using Chiron in your chart, its placement, its sign. You might even expand your view and see what Chiron's in relationship to by aspect in your chart. Do you still have a feeling of not quite fitting in, or being a misfit, or that a unique quality about you is still somehow being navigated by you in your life. That unto itself, that might not be, again, a negative, but that feeling of not fitting in is there. And that might play out by not meeting kindred souls, like-minded, like-hearted people, that kind of thing. Okay, so pause again. So here's this abandoned baby centaur and a rough start to life. And a magnificent being comes to his aid, Apollo, the god of the sun. Apollo is not only the god of the sun and the sun's path, therefore a god of light and the heart. You would think about the highest Leo qualities as an example, and qualities of the higher nature. Call it soul, call it whatever you want. But also Apollo was a musician, an artist, very refined, extremely civilized. So again, these qualities of virtue and higher character, these are qualities of Apollo. So he takes in baby Chiron and raises Chiron. Not only raises him, but educates him in the ways of ethic and morality and refinement and the arts and beauty. Chiron always had a close relationship to the woods because, of course, his mother was a wood nymph. So the forests and the woods, and so through both Chiron's intuitive nature as well as Apollo's intuition as well and harmony, he learned of all the plants and the medicinal remedies that plants could offer. So this is how Chiron eventually would become the great healer that he was, and the father, if you will, of classical Western medicine. But from Apollo, basically now the theme starts to shift. Now we start to look at kindness, how Chiron and its placement and its sign, they represent kindness that has been shown to us in some way, that usually comes in the form of either a mentor or a few mentors. It could have been a teacher, if the childhood was troubled, it could have been a teacher or, somebody in that kind of a role, Girl Scout leader, Boy Scout leader, these kinds of things. And this person not only accepted who we were for who we were, but somehow helped us through kindness, through genuineness, start to find the genuineness inside ourselves, started to lay the groundwork for some sort of psychological healing. So again, pause and reflect. So Chiron then represents how hardship and benefit are inseparable, indivisible. It is because of challenge that we find within us some creative, either creative way to address the hardship, or we creatively, reinvent ourselves from, the wounded person of whatever age to, a new person. Whatever it is, we want to start to reflect on this half being. This half of being a centaur has to play out in a few different ways. And so one of them is this inseparability of hardship and potential benefit. And of course, from the soul's point of view, from the higher nature's point of view, all circumstances exist for one's benefit. We have decided before we incarnated the nature of our incarnation. We have decided what we will take on and try to rectify or resolve. We have decided what we, and chosen what we will try to grow within us. So, from again that spiritual path point of view, nothing is happen chance, and in fact, our higher nature is the director of our intentions. And we also want to review from the point of view of benefit. Maybe one of the benefits that we've received is the actual help or the mentoring, the advice, the support that we've received from the people that we have, that again have helped us become the human being that we are today and have been through our life. So again, pause and ponder. Now, this kindness that Apollo showed to Chiron throughout his life, of course, grew the quality of empathy that already was within Chiron, just as it is within any human being, but it helped it to blossom. And also, as was already mentioned, Apollo taught Chiron many skills. They were not centaur kind of skills. They were human or godlike skills, and healing being one of them. It is also said in multiple myths that Chiron was the trainer in ethics, morality, courage, steadfastness, and dutifulness of some of the great Greek heroes. So Jason, Hercules, Achilles, I think Odysseus, but I'm not sure about Odysseus, but the others for sure. So that says a lot. You have this, again, this half-half quality of Chiron, where half is a healer and gentle and cultured and, all about harmony and poetry and beauty. And then you have the other half that is training these youths who will be the great heroes and warriors of the Greek tragedies. He's training them in their skill and in their art of actually warfare and fighting. So what's interesting about that is that it's not Mars that trains them. It's not the brawn, it's not the brute strength that is important for these beings who would then go on to be so pivotal in a variety of the Greek myths and Greek legends and the Greek history. It wasn't the brawn and the brute strength that was cultured in them or cultivated in them. It was actually wisdom, thinking, not fighting first, but trying to reason a way through, and these kinds of things. So, but again, one of the great strengths of Chiron is that he was a healer. And one of the other beings that he is said to have taught his skill to was Asclepius or Asclepius, I'm not sure how you say it, who is one of the first fathers of medicine by the Greek accounting, and I believe it is he who taught Hippocrates. I might be a little fuzzy on some of that, but I think that's all correct lineage. The flower on our screen is called a foxglove. A foxglove is a highly poisonous flower. It has digitalis in it. So even touching the seeds, you get digitalis on your fingers. And, if you then lick your fingers or rub your eyes and things like this, I mean, it's bad news. So in the way of that, of this beautiful flower that anyone might want to pick and be unassuming about, in a similar way, Chiron was wounded mistakenly by Hercules. Now again, Hercules has great love for Chiron and would never have sought to harm Chiron in any way. It's part of one of the Hercules labors. I think it's labor 4 or labor 5. No, actually, I think it's the labor related to Libra. So where he gets into a row with centaurs, and he has already gotten the Hydra poison on some of his arrows, and he shoots at some of the centaurs who have gotten just way unruly, and too many of them, and Chiron is within proximity, and he gets shot by accident. Well, Chiron is an immortal because of his father. So he could not die. And he has this, terrible wound with Hydra blood and just not good. But he also couldn't heal himself. So here's this great healer who could not heal himself of his wound, although he could heal just about everybody else. But he also couldn't die from his wound because of his one-night stand father. So what we take from all of that is that oftentimes we will either inflict a wound upon someone else without intention, and that's how sometimes friendships end, something unrepaired yet within other members of our family, this kind of thing happens, and it really is without intention. But those kinds of wounds often are the ones that hurt the most. Even in the case of if we had a troubled childhood, the perpetrator of that trouble will, and probably did, often say to the child, I didn't mean to hurt you, or I'm sorry I hurt you, that kind of a thing. So again, the mixed message here, certainly as a child, that's a terrible thing to receive. But as an adult, when we do that ourselves, that is to say, harm someone without necessarily the intention, and the ramifications of that are challenging, if not seemingly, not ready to be repaired, then like Chiron, who could not be healed, that's what this is all speaking to. So again, if you would pause and reflect on that for yourself. Now, of course, Chiron was released. He was released by Zeus, who took pity on him. And in some of the myths, there's some sort of a relationship, like a quid pro quo trade-off with Prometheus, but that's not in all the myths, and so it's a little fuzzy there. And I'm a little fuzzy on it too, but we'll leave that aside. It is Zeus that releases Chiron, that basically takes Chiron's life force away and puts Chiron in the heavens as the centaur. The centaur is different than the archer. The archer is Sagittarius. And then there's another constellation called the centaur. That's Chiron. So once again, in our chart, and oftentimes as we are in our latter years of our life, then we have learned we've learned some of the benefits that have come from the hardship of our life. We've learned to use our own process of healing and empathy and the character qualities that we have grown through adversity, and we then use them with other people. We became the wounded healer. We were the healer from the wounds that we have ourselves lived. And then ultimately, again, we often will find either with a Chiron transit later in our life, or just a Chiron cycle comes forward for us, that something further is being released, like a great release, like, oh, now I understand. Oh, now I can feel forgiveness. Oh, now I can feel empathy, like that, a very deep-seated release. So again, ponder on that. It also might be that you might not have gotten to that point yet for yourself. And if you have not, then, I want to encourage you, soul to soul, to find that empathy, to find that forgiveness, to find that release within you, because taking that which is unresolved into our next life, it's just going to be there. We're not doing ourselves any favor. So there's just a little bit more to say. Certainly as a half and half being, Chiron in the chart represents something about navigating between two worlds, the inner world and the outer world. It might be that the house somehow is offering that to us. So as an example, my Chiron is in the second house. When on this theme only, yes, it's a resource for me. Chiron is a resource for me. As an intuitive, that intuitional capacity has been with me my whole life. So it has been both the source of the misfit, not fitting in, all of those earlier themes, but also as a resource, it gives me access to both inner world ideas and outer world understanding. So that's just an example. So you would look at the house that it's in for yourself and see if you can make any sense here of this idea. This might need some time to kind of be obvious, so to speak. And so in a similar way, the Chiron can also represent then our higher and our lower nature. This that's written here is not hard and fast. This is partially dependent upon how expressive one's spiritual path is in one's life, how dedicated one is to a spiritual path, however that plays out. It doesn't have to play out by, just being a renunciant or, meditating hours a day or something like that. Lots of ways our spiritual nature can work out, but it still will be like a dedicated, we have the confidence in our spiritual nature, we have the confidence of our path. So it can be that where Chiron is representing the higher nature, and the house opposite Chiron represents the personality, and how the personality tendencies can wiggle, can struggle, can seek avoidance of the truth of being, so to speak. So especially if you have a planet or planets in the house opposite to Chiron, so then if those planets are actually in opposition to Chiron by degree, then that's really something to look at, very powerfully so. So again, pause and think on that. And of course, as has been said, where Chiron is in the chart by sign and by house represents a capacity to learn and grow from adversity and to help others with the skills and the qualities developed as a result of the adversity. So the sign will probably represent more of the way that the adversity has played out on first turn of the spiral, then qualities within the sign that are unique about you, and then third turn of the spiral is how you have used those qualities and capacities now in some relationship with a like a life demonstration of the sign. So let's say the sign is Capricorn, then the difficulty would have been, harshness. Let's say harshness as in your childhood. The uniqueness might have been that as a child you were naturally responsible and disciplined, and therefore were given responsibilities above and beyond your age. That often happens like with elder children and things like that. Or one of your parents dies and you're given responsibilities that otherwise you wouldn't have been given, that kind of thing. And then let's say as the gain, the benefit is that you grew to be so clear with your own intentions, clear in your sense of what you're capable of, that has given you good boundaries through your adult life, when to say yes, when to say no. And then as a healer, if you will, then you could help other people, help them see the value and the saving grace in having good boundaries. That's an example. And of course, Chiron is the great healer. And so wherever Chiron is also speaking of a process of transformation. So by sign, by house, and definitely any planets that it is, or your ascendant, that it is in aspect to. Those planets particularly, what they represent is being transformed, and the planets are being used in your personal transformation. And that would make sense. Let's say that Chiron is in relationship to one's sun or one's Venus or something like that. Then what the sun represents or what Venus represents would be what is being transformed and focused upon by the soul. And then because it's being focused upon and because that transformation is happening throughout the life, then yes, that planet not only is being transformed, but our whole inner being, our psyche, our habits, how we relate to others, all these kinds of things is being transformed. Okay, so that all makes sense, right? And lastly, this is an exceptional book. It's now over 20 years old. Exceptional, very readable, very easy to read. And it is still probably the best book on Chiron that there is out there. That's it. Have fun with the charts.